I hope I'm audible. I thought a forest was made up entirely of trees. But now I know that the foundation lies in the roots below the ground. Good afternoon to the galaxy of intellectuals, Your Excellency, invited guests, teachers, and my dear friends. On behalf of the student community, I, Samar Rana, and Khwahish Shubhani extend a very warm welcome to all of you on this auspicious day in the history of our college. 14 years ago, the founders of this institution had a vision of imparting high-quality knowledge to hone the budding engineers and the researchers of the country towards unprecedented academic excellence. Today is a day where the past, the present, and the future come together, taking vows to uplift the institute to the pinnacle of glory.
We started this auspicious day by organizing a blood donation drive in collaboration with Road Track Club of Outstanding Business Students and Road Track Club of Delhi NCR. Students and faculty members enthusiastically participated in this noble affair. In an attempt to give back to the environment and the society, we also organized a plantation drive and planted approximately 1,000 trees across the campus. The plantation drive was concluded by the planting of the Kadam tree by Director Professor Ranjan Bose.
Without further ado, I would like to invite Dean of Communication and Alumni Affairs, Dr. Paro Mishra Ma'am, to come on the stage to introduce the esteemed speaker for the day.
Thanks, Khwahish and Samar. So I've been given this momentous task of introducing somebody of stature as Dr. Shah, and I'll try and do justice to it. Dr. Chayanika Shah graduated in the 1980s from IIT Bombay, where she completed her master's and PhD. She's a feminist and a queer rights activist who has been involved with the women's movement in India for several years now. Dr. Shah is an optimist activist at heart, a physicist by training, and a teacher by choice. Her work since retiring voluntarily in 2008 has mainly revolved around issues of feminist studies of science, science education, sexuality, and gender studies. She has campaigned, researched, taught, and written on politics of feminist studies of science and technology. Dr. Shah has been an active member of two voluntary collectives in Mumbai, Forum Against Oppression of Women, and Lydia, a queer feminist LGBT collective. Her co-authored books include, amongst others, No Outlaws in Gender Galaxy with Zuban Books, and Space, Segregation and Discrimination, The Politics of Space in Institutions of Higher Education by Yoda Press. IIIT is extremely thankful to Dr. Shah for graciously accepting our invite and for traveling all the way from Mumbai to deliver today's public lecture. I now invite Dr. Shah to deliver the public lecture on Inclusive STEM Education, Who Benefits. Thank you.
I would like to invite Saksham to present Parma with the welcome to the esteemed.
Okay, I should present?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you everyone for having me here, for the kind introduction and the very warm welcome that you've given me. I must admit that when I received Dr. Mishra's message asking me to come and speak here, I didn't reply because I thought that she's mistaken who she's writing to. And I wouldn't be called to give a public lecture of this kind. But yeah, she insisted and told me that she knows who I am and she's calling me for it. So I do believe that I have so many different spaces from where I come to speak on education that I'd like to speak a little bit about this journey and tell you that what I'm going to speak about when I talk about inclusive STEM education, it is, I cannot now say that this is what I learned from here and this is what I learned from here, but it's informed by all these many things that I've done. And it's not necessarily always an academic exercise. It's been a process of learning and doing in a climate in this country when there weren't so many people talking about feminism and science, feminism and technology, not talking about inclusion also is something that we started using as regular language in the recent past, although we have spoken of affirmative action in this country, but the language of diversity and inclusion is new to us. To understand the various levels of inclusions that we need to talk about is a discussion that's just about beginning. So I thought that let me just tell you what all informs me. So as Dr. Mishra said, I have studied in IIT, and I think that elite institutions of that nature make you in many ways. I do believe, and now having spent many years in campuses, almost 25, 28 years in campuses, and even more, maybe 35 years in campuses, I think that the campus is very crucial to an adult's growth, especially if you are a residential student there. Because you are an adult and you've come out of home and you are trying to learn how to be an adult. And that what the campus gives you at that point, apart from what it gives you in the curriculum and the classroom, it gives you a lot of exposure. And for me, that happened. I think I also came to IIT at a time when this was just post the emergency. Bombay was a very, very politically active city. And even though higher education institution campuses are not really based in the city, although they are geographically located in the city, but they seem to have no connection with the city, it somehow infiltrated our lives. It was also the time that the women's movements began. And it was also the time when IIT in 1980 was the first and only strike at that time that happened, in which the institution was shut down just because one day students boycotted classes and some 5 students sat on a hunger strike. And that was on the issue of students who come in on affirmative action and were asked to leave after many years because they have not kept up with their course requirements. And so after 4 or 5 years they asked to leave. And students supported it. And I think it's critical that in 1980 students supported the students who were sitting on hunger strike. And IIT of course squashed that agitation for whatever it was worth. But the conversation that we were having as students was that if you've got people in, then you put them in the regular competition, it doesn't work. You have to do something more. You have to do something more to make them part of the classroom. And this I remember as early conversations, which I can articulate in a very different language today, but at that time I don't think we had the capacity to talk like that. We were all science and technology students. The other thing was that we have a very, very small number of girl students in the campus. And that had its pluses and minuses. And that now reflecting back, I think that campus itself did many things to me to start thinking in particular manners. So there was the feminist movements, there was the general possibilities that opened post the emergency to say that everything can happen. If the emergency can go, then anything can happen, anything can change. It was that optimism with which we started our young adult lives. And by the end of my PhD program, I found that there was a tussle inside me because my PhD program was in theory physics and I was doing my PhD in theory physics, and I had no connection between what I was doing in my PhD and what I was doing thinking about otherwise. These two seemed like two different worlds. And for whatever it is worth, I mean, at that time I thought I was not that brilliant to stay on in physics and give my whole life to it. So I shall take a different route. And I decided to discontinue research in physics, much to many people's, they were upset with the decision. But I decided to then continue teaching. And so in those days, teaching was much simpler. It didn't have so many hours of administrative work. It didn't take so many hours from us. And so I could manage, and we had longer vacations. So the vacations became a time when I had another life. And so then the feminist movements, teaching in college, subsequently the queer trans movements, then, getting more and more introduced to feminisms in academia, getting introduced to women's studies programs. I think all of this over a period of time, doing regular undergraduate teaching in a regular college in Bombay, it informed a lot of my understanding about science and science education in particular. So all of this, and I'm underlining the feminists and the queer trans because I think both these movements, any discussion on gender, sex and sexuality, is actually invokes science in a very particular way. There is a tendency from those of us who are being repressed and marginalized because of our gender, sex, sexuality to try and find answers within science. And you do find sometimes some answers and some pathways from there. But at the same time, you also find science normativizing and naturalizing a lot of social understanding. And you see that's a very clear space in which you see how science is being used to maintain the status quo. Right? So that I think these tensions then also pushed me. So I was working in the area of medicine, working in the area of sexuality, working in the area of health, and it was very evident that while there were some solutions, there was also an overarching sense of science being used by those in power constantly. Right? And there then the feminist studies of science came to some clarity that science is not what is the popular perception of science, it is something else. And so, in the last 10 years, I think I have spent more time thinking about education, more than science. Thinking about science education more. Also because I think education itself, and higher education in particular, in the last 30 years, has undergone a massive transformation for multiple reasons. I would like to elucidate them as well. Many of you will know this, and you may make the connections. But one is post the Mandal Commission. A recognition of caste in different ways. From just untouchability to thinking of caste in a more stratified manner, in a more nuanced manner. And the fact that the intake of students went up everywhere. So there were more students who were coming in on affirmative action than there were before that. Also, it is like 1980s, almost 1990s, almost the time when we are some 50 years into, or 40 years into the independence. So there is a strident voice of those who were not included in the project of education, entering and becoming visible and becoming audible in the arena of higher education. At the same time, 1990 is also the time when you have privatization as a starting point. And for those of us who studied in public institutions, who paid like how much? 300 rupees tuition fees for the whole year and 600 rupees hostel fees for the whole year, and wondered now that if these were the fees at that time, would I have gone to this institution? Is a question that I ask myself, although I come from many privileges. So recognizing that privatization is also happening at the same time as those excluded are entering higher education. And I think the turning point that most of us must have witnessed and most of us have witnessed is around 2014-15, when the Rohit Vemula movement happened, when the students all across campuses, whether it was Pinjatod movements across campuses, or it was the anti-caste languages or students who came from marginalized castes talking about education, that we had a moment when there is a tension. On the one hand, there is a taking away of public education, which is where these students are coming in. So you are having drying up of funding, you're finding that less and less money is coming into public education. Those institutions are going away. At the same time, a section of students who were not in education till then had started coming in. And so a lot of, the people who had access to public institutions till then, them migrating to private institutions, them migrating to education outside, a lot of churning has happened in the last 10, 12 years. So it became more important to then understand higher education from both the point of gender, caste, and the new languages of ability, which as educationists I think we've tackled the least. We've not looked at ability as a category that we need to see of what we privilege and what we don't privilege along ability. So I think for me then these became important questions to look at higher education per se. So now in this climate, when we are speaking of inclusion and diversity, I'm going to make some comments which I cannot explain in great detail because we don't have that much time and I don't have a watch. Will you just let me go? It's not.
Not about 15 minutes. 20 minutes, yeah.
Sure. So when we look at inclusion and diversity, the first thing that I think is, one is yes, get as many people in. That is the benchmark. You have to get people in. There's no shortcut to that. It is necessary, but it's not sufficient at all. Just getting people in does not do anything. Just getting your numbers filled does not do anything. And once people come in and they talk about their realities, I think what we have not learned yet is to listen to that. To listen to how those from the margin, and I would put it, how those from the margin look at the center. That gaze has to shift. So long what we're doing is we have an established structure, a certain pedagogic manner in which we do our programs, and we don't change that. We stay there and we just let people come in and fit into that. I think that's not inclusion. Inclusion would require us to then look at this that we have constructed for so long and try and see what needs to change here from the eyes of those who are outside. And I think two examples I give. One is the example of sexual harassment. Right? Sexual harassment by definition is something that is unwelcome. And it's seen as an anti-discrimination procedure on campus. Right? Unwelcome. By the very fact that you call something unwelcome, it is, that act is as much structural as it is individual. What is unwelcome to me may not be unwelcome to somebody else. What is unwelcome to me from someone may not be unwelcome for me from someone else. It's a very contextualized thing. And if I don't trust the person who is making the complaint, then I have missed the bus. I cannot address that sexual harassment complaint because it starts from the premise that the institution has to recognize that gendered power goes against those who are not cis men on campus. Right? The campus itself is structured in a way that gendered power is going against the people who are not cis men. That's one recognition that I need to hold. And the second I need to hold is that all these people who are not cis men who are coming here are also coming from various other backgrounds. And all of those have to be understood to be able to decide on a sexual harassment complaint. Right? And I'm not saying that you will believe everyone. But you have to trust. You have to trust to listen carefully to what is being said. What usually happens in institutions, I don't know what happens here, what usually happens in institutions is blanket rules. Right? Blanket rules, blanket statements of we are a family, in our family nothing happens. Right? In this institution it's like a family. Here we don't have any such things. I've heard it way too often. Or it is that, boys and girls should not do this together, boys and girls should stay separate, boys and girls this, boys and girls that. Even for faculty there are rules. In doing that itself, the message that is being given is that we are a compulsorily heterosexist campus. Compulsorily heterosexist means we believe that men and women, if they become friends, they will have sex. There's nothing else that can happen. And if men and men or women and women or whoever else gets together, they will not have sex. Right? This is one belief. The second belief is that there's only one kind of sex that is possible, which happens at night in hostels, behind closed doors, and so we should not let this intermobility between hostels. Or we have rules around what teachers should wear, what students should wear, and every college has its own version of it. So we are happy in the name of protecting, in the name of taking care, we put rules. And I think that is not how you address sexual harassment. How do you learn and educate? And this is part of education according to me. Whether you are in STEM, whether you are in humanities, you have to pay attention to what are you teaching. How are you teaching responsibility for actions to your students? And how much are you expecting that responsibility from the teachers in the campus or from the non-teaching staff on campus? What are the conversations that are happening there? These are important questions. Similarly, the question of caste. The association of, or the conflation of caste with class is so easy that, if they're rich, then they don't need any affirmative action. Then we've not understood caste. When we keep underlining merit, we're not understanding caste. So we have not really looked through these things, is my premise. The second thing I think, so if so many people are being excluded, one is yes, society is responsible. I'm not even taking away any notion of responsibility from society. But more than that, what is it that we are doing wrong? That people are feeling excluded, people are not feeling included in this campus is an exercise that we have to begin. And with that I come specifically to STEM. Because STEM has been seen as, it is seen as something that men do. And this is a dominant thought across the world. Modern science technology is what men do. I was just asking what is the ratio of students here. This is information technology. It doesn't require any muscle power. It probably requires some grace sense, but that's okay. But we find still you have lesser women here than men. The language of the brain and its capacity is so high when we speak of scientists and when we speak of people in technology. I don't need to underline it. That those of us who do physics, chemistry, especially those of us who do theory physics, we think there are no other people like us in the world. Nobody thinks as brilliantly as us. All of us who do pure maths. So we have already, this is the caste structure, isn't it? And it gives so much importance to the brain. And that to a particular function of the brain. It's not like the whole brain works in the same manner. But this has led also to a belief that science is objective. Which, if I talk to scientists in research institutions, they tell me, of course not. But what is it that we teach? How is it that we communicate science? How is it that we talk about it? The notion is that it is objective means that if you did this experiment here in this manner with all its limitations and somebody else did it in the same way, they would come at the same answer. Sure, that's a very limited understanding of objectivity. Firstly, it's assumed that because I practice this objective discipline, that I become objective. That never happens. As scientists are not objective people, let me just cut it short there. They are as rooted in social biases, or even more so, because they're not even wanting to examine their own social biases. So we have a system in which we are encouraging people to not examine. To not examine what is the role that the doer, the maker of knowledge, is playing in the knowledge that is being made. We are denying that science is a product of culture. We are denying that science is also a situated knowledge. We deny, in our way that we teach, we deny that there are partial truths. And for me, it is all antithetical to science itself. The science, why do I want to get people into science? That's one question. And what happens to science when people come? That's the second question. I want to get people into science because for me, it gives me a humility. It shows me what a blip in space and time we are. It makes me feel that there is so much outside in this world that I cannot be centered around my abilities and my whatevers. So actually, it ought to teach me humility. It doesn't. It ought to teach me that there is so much in the world that I do not know. It ought to teach me there's so much diversity in this world. And if there is diversity in the world, where is the diversity amongst us? Why are we so rejecting of diversity here? So actually, I want those lessons to be taught to my students. I want to teach science in the way that I teach this. And as a teacher of undergrad science, I felt that what is happening at the end of it is that I'm trying to make them physicists. They're not learning any notion of what physics is, and they're not necessarily becoming physicists. I mean, out of, say, every year I must have taught around 100 students, and 2,000 students, maybe I have 5 who become physicists. Maybe 10 who became physics teachers. The others just went into the world with a graduate degree. And did they get anything specific from science into their lives, into the society? I don't think so. Even engineering courses, you have so many engineering courses. How many of those people are pursuing those engineering disciplines today? Everybody is moving to your disciplines, IT. So there is something that we have to bring from our discipline, and I feel that more and more people need to come here to hear that, to get that joy that I got from seeing the vastness of this universe and seeing the ability to, seeing the specific method of understanding this universe. Why do I want people to come in? Because by now there are umpteen examples. Who is there and at what time they are there, they decide what questions will get asked. So people used to ask me early on that, okay, so you're saying feminist studies of science, would you have a feminist theory of gravity like you have Newton's theory of gravity? My answer was no, maybe I don't have a feminist theory of gravity, but whether gravity is what I need to study or not. Or is there something else that I think is important to study? Or is there something that I'm not looking at because everybody is wanting us to study this? Maybe those are the questions I want to bring in. We all know, and I'm speaking from physics because that's what I'm familiar with. We all know that in the 1940s, nuclear physics really rose because there was a war, there was a world war going on, in which the atom bomb was something that they wanted. We all know that in the post-World War situation, cosmology grew, space physics grew. We understood the universe much better. But that was not because they wanted to understand the universe. That question was asked because we were in a Cold War stage. We all know that today we say that homosexuality is natural, normal, whatever we want to call it, we say that. How did the thing from disorder to not a disorder happen? Not because they got new evidence. Because they heard people, they realized that what they were saying is wrong. So there is a whole location from where we understand science plays a very huge role in it. And for me, when more people come in, when people who have different ways of perceiving this world, whether they are people who come from indigenous lifestyles, whether they are people who come with different kinds of abilities, with limited ways of using vision and hearing, I think that they will see the universe in a very different way and they will bring more understanding of the universe to us. So who benefits finally? If you make it inclusive, of course the people who come in benefit if we make it something that makes beneficial to them. If we just bring them in and keep on teaching the same way that this is Mr. X's law and this is Mr. Y's law and this is Mr. Z's law and this is how we understand the world, and there were these geniuses who always Mr. X, Mr. Y, Mr. Z, who had enough spare time and they figured out the world because they were so genius. Nobody is interested in that science. That's not what we need to teach also. So, if we teach what people want, then yes, there is a lot to be told to the people who come in and they benefit. Society benefits. In COVID times, you have to understand. This was last 2.5 years. We all saw science studies happening around us. We heard the voices of the scientists, we heard the voices of the governments, we heard the voices of international bodies, we heard the voices of the pharma companies. We heard everybody at the same time. Were we able to make sense? Were we able to figure who to believe, who not to believe? How do I trust which information? Did we have a conversation on, oh, so this is how consensus is arrived at in science? Did we understand what is the process of making vaccines? Did we manage to communicate that? This was in a collapsed time when all of us were dealing with it. But we were not equipped to do this because we have not taught it like that. And finally, science itself benefits if there are more people asking different questions because different aspects of the universe get understood when different people come in. So for me, inclusion is not because it's a goal that the government gives us. Inclusion is a goal because I want my classroom to be varied. I want to be able to tell my students something that makes meaning to them. And I want to think about my subject in a way that gets informed by many other voices. That for all of this to flourish, I want inclusion instead. If we just get women in, get so and so in, get so and so in, no inclusion is going to happen. Thank you.
That was indeed a really insightful talk, ma'am. Really thank you for it. Sure. So we now be opening the platform for question and answers. So if anyone has a question, they can raise it hand. Can we give the mic?
Yeah, so when you mentioned about even the job sector, like in IT jobs, so something I've come across is now in IT, like product companies or startups or mid-tier and established companies, they boast women-men ratio, better ratio. But one of my colleagues once pointed out to me, how many women tech leads do you see, even the senior most of them. And then when we were having this conversation, we observed there was just even one in our entire branch. I was in a development center in Chennai. And this was true even at many of my friends' companies. So there were a lot of reasons, and some silly reasons we got were they won't be able to take late night calls with our counterparts abroad or with the clients because of family structure and so on. That is actually wrong in that we should not be taking late night calls, any employee. but then it's understood like implicitly people have to do that, and that in turn brings in a bias which sort of brings in discrimination. So one thing is there are policies which try to keep this in check and so on, but these are some nuances which are not discussed. And even among the people who are married and people who are single, like there is again a divide there. So there is like gender issues and also issues where there is no accommodations for them, though we have better maternity and paternity leaves now. So how would, let's say, a VP or a product center head, like how would that person try to tackle this? Because there are so many nuances and so many dynamics in this, and that the relationship with the counterparts cannot be damaged. And so I just wanted to, this is one example I wanted to, because I observe like there is a lot of complexities.
So it should be true everywhere, and I can tell you another example from women in physics. So women in physics have been doing these quantitative studies for the last 20 years. And they've been collecting data from various countries of number of PhDs and then looking at them when they are placed in the research hierarchies, and they find the same results across the globe. And then the first inference was that, their roles in family and, at this time when they are supposed to be most productive, they are also reproductive and whatever, that kind of language was being used. And then some of them, once we spoke, we said that let's talk to the people who dropped out, to ask them why they are dropping out, instead of making a presumption. And that conversation led to a very different understanding of why people are dropping out. Because this thing that, at night they can't take calls, this is all our imagination of what women are. And as you rightly said, that one is that why should anybody take a call at any time in the night and day? Right? You either take only at night or you take only in the day. Which of course the IT sector does not believe, because they are the IT sector. And they're ruining working hours for everybody in this world, but never mind. So I think there's a whole conversation. So this thing of asking anybody, whatever gender they are, is it convenient for you to do this at this time? Because it's an odd time. It's a practice that should be there for everyone. Why should that practice? I mean, some of my friends who are women physicists, they've been fighting. They've been fighting that you make a program only for women, and you find less women coming into the program. In the sense that you make some kind of, you give them that they can take leave for children for many weeks, and you find labs hiring less women. So actually, there's something that you give everyone. You make it a general practice that anybody can avail of this. Anybody can avail of a 5-year gap, which is a huge thing in science. I don't know, as if some world is going to change in 5 years. That if you come back after 5 years, you actually do not get a position. Then there are problems like in large organizations, you don't have that, but in science organizations, what is called the two-body problem. That the husband and wife cannot get accommodated in the same institution, and they're usually working in the same area. There's usually only one post that is available. Usually, and that is how society is, usually the man is older, usually the man hence has more papers, and hence the man is more wanted, and the woman doesn't, she goes and does college teaching. Right? So there are examples of that also, but a related thing, I think, when we're talking about IT, for me, one is to look at all these nuances and try and make as many things gender neutral as we can, to also indicate that we don't think it's only women's job to do this. We feel that it's a job for everybody to look after children. And once the child is not breastfeeding, anybody can look after that child. So that's a message also that the company gives others. But apart from this, I think there's so much online violence. Sexual violence, gendered violence, there's so much breach of privacy. Where are the conversations in that? In the tech industry. I mean, we've seen Muslim women being auctioned, and it's made available. I mean, I'm not saying that technology is responsible, but technology also has to think, what are we creating? And who are we creating it for, and what is it being used for? So there has to be a voice from there also. I don't think that voice exists. And whatever I know from friends who are in tech, that it is a very male-dominated, even the open source is a very male-dominated area. So it's not like we are having those conversations, and they are very important. But I also feel that in our programs in your colleges, we are not trained. We are not trained to think that there is a larger structure to this and I need to understand that. We think we know, and I think that that's also a very big problem. So I don't know what kind of programs you have here and how much do you get aware of social realities and how much do you understand your own location in those social realities.
Thank you, Dr. Shah, for that talk. Thoroughly enjoyed it. I just have this one question. So, even in the most well-meaning discussions about inclusion and diversity, say, whether it's recruitment, whether it's special drive for, say, women, for sort of non-cis heterosexual identities, for different caste groups for that matter, even the most well-meaning sort of interactions, the one thing that people often end up saying is, okay, let's try and do this, but without compromising on the quality. I really want to ask how to address this. Because even when they are well-meaning, when they're coming in from a position of sympathy, the implicit bias is that anybody who comes in through a special process is automatically not up to the mark. And how do we really handle this?
My flippant answer to it is that if somebody has reached where at an equal position as you, she already needed to be 5 steps higher. Right? It is a reality. I mean, if you don't recognize that we actually, I mean, there's so many studies that show blind reviews of papers, blind reviews of applications. So many studies are now proven that the minute you see a name, the minute you recognize a surname in India, the minute you hear the accent, you have many ways of, spotting people. And so, unless we believe that we are beyond all those biases, then we can probably take a position of quality, one. The second, of course, is that, this is again the gender question that has been messed up by science. In trying to find out what role does biology play in the sex difference. The articulation of this question itself is problematic. Because it's not a sex difference that we're talking about a gender difference. And then when you start looking at biological explanations, then you're already messing it up. And if you're not even revising your gender theory to look at from trans and queer lives, that it is nothing. I mean, gender and biology have nothing to do with each other. So I think that if we listen more to trans voices, trans women, trans men, maybe we will revise our understanding of quality also. And there's this famous person, Ben Bars. He was a biologist, and he's a trans man. He wrote a very small piece in Nature. You must look at it. Because, as I say, it's the most, what should one say? It's a
scientific
because the same person, he's a trans man, so he's been a biologist all his life, and he had papers in his earlier name also. And he writes that, since I became Ben Mars, he was told by somebody, oh, your sister's work is not up to the mark. The same person is doing now better apparently. And he said, I can finish my sentences. And I've heard this from many people, my trans men friends who are in tech. They say that I use this power to interrupt men to say, let the women finish speaking. So it's so incipient. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Shah, for the talk. So there is a tendency within institutions to think that, if you don't talk about caste, it will not be there. If you don't talk about gender, gender discrimination will not exist. And which is why they refrain from having, explicit bodies or institution cells addressing these issues, like an SC/ST cell, even though they have been mandated by the government. So I just wanted to know if you have any thoughts on the role of such institutions in inclusivity. And in this institution also we don't have explicit gender cells, SC/ST cells, and so on. So just your thoughts on that.
So I have a couple of responses to that. One, in the last study that I did when looking at discrimination and looked at campuses. So I went to IIM Ahmedabad and I was looking at only elite institution campuses. And IIM Ahmedabad does not disclose caste of the students to anybody, including in-house faculty who want to do research on caste and student intake. They don't disclose it at all. So they claim to be very equal and they claim to be non-discriminatory and so on and so forth. And when we were walking around in the campus, and the campus is of course much lauded. Every architecture student goes to study that campus because it's made by Greek and it's supposed to be this brilliant architecture. If you go, I mean, what we read in the design of that place is that there is an academic, so it's very managed. It's a management institution. You have one academic area. Around that you have student housing. A much larger section after that is faculty housing. Again, they say we are very equal. The director has the same size house as any other faculty. So that is there. Then, but the non-teaching staff has houses at the periphery. And they go class 4, 3, 2, 1, whatever their nomenclature. The last category of people who work on that campus, their residences are at the end of the campus, at the back, facing on the outside. Right? And they did not even have a wall on this side. I mean, they did not have a window in the wall that was towards the campus. Some people fought and got that wall made because that house otherwise had no ventilation. So what does it tell me? I read caste in this fluent. I not only read caste, I also read that a student who comes from a housing like that is already being told that this is not the place for you. The faculty housing, whoever inhabits that, they are the people who belong here because the faculty has really huge lands with huge tracts of open spaces and whatnot. So that's one. The second, I think that this thing of not having SC/ST cells or not having, we feel that if we don't talk, this will not happen. It actually allows for much more inherent casteism and inherent sexism to pass. And one has seen, I mean, we've done some work with, there's a student who died by suicide in Bombay 3-4 years ago, Payal Tadvi, and we're following up on that. And the same thing, I mean, there is so much inherent casteism, and there's so much inherent, but there's no SC/ST cell. Nobody thinks it is necessary to put it in. But the whole language of merit for me is very, very problematic. And connecting to what Professor Mishra also said, that you cannot keep saying that this method in which I evaluate you is the best judge of your ability to be a doctor, engineer, scientist, anything, etc., etc. That's what some people have the privilege of attending coaching classes, of getting books of that nature, getting education of that nature, that they excel here. That does not mean that they're the most intelligent. Yeah.
So just a follow-up to the previous question that you were telling, with the IIM Ahmedabad campus example. So is there not an assumption that people whose houses do not have the window, I mean, I'm just trying to relate it. I can understand the caste structure as a metaphor there, but what I'm trying to understand is that how does it relate to the caste structure, as the caste structure is the sort of general and SC/ST and the OBC, because people of different caste will be the 4+ employees, and people of different caste will be the faculty members. So while I understand that there is a caste structure inherently present, and which is present in any institution, as you can see, there is a director. I mean, in IIIT, the director lives in a flat, but it's a penthouse. So we can always say that, yeah, there is a roof garden, which we don't have. Other faculty, so there are different, and now there are new faculty housing, so maybe they have better houses than the old faculty housing. So that we can always say that there is some structure present where something is better on the other thing. But I'm just trying to understand it from the actual caste structure and the caste and the caste system in India and the caste structure which are present in different ways in India?
So I think that if we pay attention, then those who occupy that category of employees who are now going away from all academic institutions. Like we've given up cleaning and maintenance to contractors. So we don't have those employees anymore, which is also what's happening in IIM, that soon those people, these are the last employees that are going to stay there. That category of people have always been from particular castes. There's no reservation there. And that there's a conflicted thing that, you know, whether you can, whether there should be reservation within that also, that, you know, open category people should be allowed to come or not. People don't go, that's a reality. And secondly, there's also, I mean, in reality, nobody who is doing the cleaning of our streets or picking up of our garbage is coming from castes that are different from the ones that are put under the scheduled caste categories. Right? So that's the reality. So it is inherent in that. And the class, the higher than that, where there may be other castes, that's not segregated in the same manner. It's smaller.
But so that I understand the last part, and I totally agree that people who are in a lower category jobs, as you can say, have no matter what we have done.
Because that category is also marked by a certain kind of work.
Yeah. But what about, let's say, the faculty members?
Then they may be, I don't know if they have a reservation in faculty.
No, even without reservation there.
If there is no reservation, I am sure that there will be no faculty in IIT. There will be faculty from different castes if there is reservation. 100%. I look at TFR.
Okay.
There is no reservation. See if there is anybody from any other caste other than the Brahmins. How many are there?
Okay, thank you.
But like IIT hospitals have a reservation in the faculty recruitment, but I see people from all.
I'm telling you about it.
Can you give us one example where you don't see this kind of thing anywhere in the world? You go to US, there is a group of Mercedes. No, hang on. There is a group of people having a Mercedes. They are having their own club. They don't entertain the people who are driving a Toyota or the second class. So give us one example where you, all these idealisms that you are just talking about, really exist. Then you talk basically that it is bad in India that we don't have it.
I am actually not talking of an ideal situation. I am talking of a reality where on the one hand we don't want to speak of caste, on the other hand caste is reflected in our practice. That's all. I am not at all advocating that all faculty should have similar houses or all staff should have similar houses. I am not even going there. That may be my personal belief. I didn't even utter that. So my only response was to the fact that your practice, you behave as if you don't do anything that is gendered, casteist, exclusionary. We are very inclusive people. Is the language. But actually when you pull it apart a little, then we see something else. And we should learn to do that ourselves. We should not wait for somebody else to come and do it for us. We should learn to do it ourselves. Where is it that we are lacking and what is it that we are not doing?
So we have time for one last question, and that's all.
I think none of the questions came from that side, so maybe we need to give some opportunity to our audience there as well. So, yeah, then I invite people to raise hands and then.
So in the beginning part of your talk, a very insightful talk, by the way, thank you for that. You mentioned that taking in students, for example, in higher education, be it different castes or different genders, is not enough. Right? And then there are systems, as you rightly mentioned, in a lot of, particularly these like elite institutes, and that neither faculty nor fellow students know who is from what caste. Right? So, but I, being from one of the elite institutes, in my undergraduate degree, what I experienced, like my roommate was a lower caste. I came to know the day one, because all of us students, when they arrive in the hostel, they ask like, what was your all India rank? What is your all India rank? So that is how I came to know. So hers was like very high. Okay. So, but otherwise, faculty doesn't know. She is evaluated on the same benchmark, same examinations, everything as I was or the rest of the class did. So, knowing that she was struggling, I could tutor her, extend X, Y, Z. But eventually, she could not cope and she was terminated after 3 semesters. And eventually, the same fate happened to 3 more students, boys, and we came to know that all were like very much high AIR and they were all like category students. So now, being a faculty myself, being part of a system where I am, I also don't know, I teach a class of say 100 students, I don't know who is from what. I can give the same question paper to all the 100 students. So what would you suggest us as faculty members, as people who are building an institution, trying or hoping to be more inclusive, what all we can do despite not knowing who needs more help or who comes from a difficult starting point, different starting point? How can we help them?
So having been a teacher for very long, I think that even if I don't know what caste they come from, as I look at my class, I know who's struggling.
Yeah.
Right? That's not unknown to me. If I am looking at my students, I know who is struggling. And I feel that there is not enough space in institutions. Some of us may do it because we feel that we'll make that extra time to help that person, reach out to that person, do whatever for that person, whoever that person is. But I believe that there has to be institutional mechanisms that help us do that. That is not something that I do just because I am willing to stretch myself beyond my limit, one. And the second thing is, that's why I don't agree with not disclosing, because it gets disclosed. It gets disclosed, then might as well say, and disclosing also means, there's an education here of everybody. Because to think that they are less, because they came on so-called category, is something that automatically happens to all of us. And that is a problem. If I don't recognize that years of repression, whether it is women, whether it is trans people, whether it is whoever, years of repression has an effect. What I get in my life also has an effect on who I am coming here. What kind of, all of us who come with high ranks are also getting, privileges at home to sit and study for hours on end, to get all of that comfort, to get our coaching classes. Look at IITs these days. I don't even know how, and IIT has a very strange thing. So there's this one woman, Vijaya Korwar, who was the gold medalist in IIT in 1976. I have read a book on IIT, and IIT starts giving alumni awards. This woman is still not awarded. She's still working. She's still not awarded by IIT. They suddenly decided, there were no women, so they started awarding women in the last 10 years, many more. But this woman has still not been awarded. And in the book in IIT, they say that she came from that. There was at one point, if you were in a merit in your state board, you could get direct admission to IIT. You didn't have to come through the JEE. So she came through that. So she was very diligent. And she knew how to crack exams. They don't want to call her intelligent. And I'm like, what is wrong with you people? IIT is all about cracking exams. I don't think it's anything else. It is about the ability to crack exams that makes you intelligent. But this woman was not given that credit. And none of her teachers, and this book is there, you can read it. None of her teachers are saying that she was a brilliant student. So there is a lot of things that we do without knowing, because we're not examining ourselves. And I think that we have not learned to do it. I think social sciences, at least there are beginnings of doing it. I don't think that they have succeeded. I don't think they've reached anywhere on that. But we are not even starting instead. And we are just worried about getting women in. That is our current motto. Get women into STEM. I don't know, it's an international motto. So everybody is doing things to get women in. But as
Just
as you said, that just getting them in may not be enough. So the other day, actually, we were also discussing about, like, say, for example, we were just like assessing some projects. So should a women applicant get just an extra mark to just for being a girl? She otherwise the project is being evaluated on XYZ rubrics. So similarly, like when you say system level intervention.
But by doing that, you will also have to tell her that mark does not mean that she is being compromised on ability. That mark is being given because she is already
The
better.
problem is, I think in this kind of a system, what happens is that the person who's getting the mark, like say if we give some extra marks to a lower caste student, if I as an instructor know and the system is in place, that you can give 5 extra marks to a person from a SC/ST seat, okay, in every exam. So, but then the surrounding people, the other people who are not getting those 5 marks, they start like thinking or believing that again that comes down to that low quality output.
That's why I'm saying.
That will create a gap between the society and the students. That's the reality.
But that is according to
The gap already exists, but that will also further basically.
See, this is the perennial problem. Can I just say that and end here? This is a perennial problem. And today's society is encouraging us to say this, that if I talk about caste, I am casteist. I still believe that not talking about caste is being casteist.
Due to, I'm really sorry, but due to time constraints, we really need to limit the number of questions here. I request Pallavi ma'am to present Dr. Shah with a token of thanks. We will now be resuming in a few moments once Director Sir joins us.